When I was less than 2 years old, I had my first bout of serious pneumonia, and it was compounded by doctors finding out the hard way that I'm allergic to penicillin and sulfa drugs. So I went into anaphylactic shock, was in the hospital, was given last rites and extreme at the time, and was not expected to live. But I did, blessedly. And from that point, I had pneumonia about 12 more times before I was 18 years old.
Oh, wow.
And because of my allergy to penicillin and sulfa drugs, I would be isolated from school and recovering sometimes 3, 4 weeks at a time.
Are you walking through a storm that feels like it will never end? Do you wonder if life's storms have stolen the beauty from your life for good? You're in the right place. My name is Heather, and like you, I've been through a storm or two and wondered if life would ever be beautiful again. Here we share warriors' words, stories of discovering beauty after battles, and the worth in your wounds. Pick up your sword or boxing gloves and join the battle. Your words are powerful, my friends. Make them warrior words. Welcome, warriors. Maureen Pratt is an award-winning Catholic journalist and the author of 12 books, including Peace in the Storm, Meditations on Chronic Pain and Illness, and Peace in the Storm for Caregivers. She is also the founder and executive director of the Peace in the Storm Project, a pastoral ministry of accompaniment in the Catholic tradition that helps dioceses and parish communities accompany caregivers and persons with chronic illness, ongoing pain, the effects of aging, disability, and Alzheimer's and other dementia. Maureen has degrees from Georgetown University, UCLA, and the Jesuit School of Theology at Santa Clara University. She has lived with serious, ongoing illness, including lupus, for most of her life, and has been a caregiver to several close relatives. She is also a graduate gemologist, fellow of the Gemological Association of Great Britain, and a certified jewelry appraiser. Through all the tremendous challenges she's experienced, she credits her faith with bringing light in the darkness, strength in the pain, and peace in the storm. Now, before we hear from Maureen, here is a review from Alyssa Gossett, and you may remember her name because she was a guest on episode 62, and she writes, "Stories of Strength and Resilience." While the circumstances vary, Heather brings to light resounding stories of strength and resilience. If you are in a battle, another woman has been through the same or a similar battle, and her testimony offers hope that you too will have victory. Alyssa, I love this review. Thank you for pointing out that we don't have to be walking through the same storm in order to find strength in another woman's story. And since we aired Alyssa's episode, she has started her own podcast called This Highly Sensitive Woman. So I encourage you to go check her out on her own podcast. Now, would you like me to read your review on an upcoming episode? Go to Apple Podcasts and leave a review for the show. Who knows, I may just read your review next. And when you're done leaving that review, come and join us in the Warrior Words Facebook community at facebook.com/groups/Warrior Words. And I want this community to be, a welcoming space for women who have survived trauma and now want to thrive. As women who are designed in the image and likeness of God, you are inherently beautiful, and intellectually, you may know that. But maybe the storms of life, the scars you have now, maybe prevent you from seeing your own beauty. So this community was made for women like you and like me who sometimes struggle with new traumas or find it difficult to find beauty in life's situations. So let's support and encourage one another and come join us in the Facebook group. Now, grab a tissue and join Maureen and me as we talk about how sometimes our plans are not God's plans for us. And sometimes we find purpose in the midst of our suffering. Let's rock. Well, welcome to the Warrior Words podcast, Maureen. How are you today?
I'm doing really well. Thank you, Heather. And thank you so much for inviting me on.
Well, when I heard you on Allison's podcast, and I'll put Allison's podcast in the show notes as well, but I really enjoyed your story, and I thought it would be perfect for the listeners of this podcast. So, um, as we discussed, like before hitting the record button, let's start in the beginning because it's a very good place to start. When you were younger, because you had a childhood that was a little different than probably most people have lived.
Absolutely. And thank you for going back there because it, it was a formative period for me and proved to be a thread, the beginning of a thread, you might say, or the knot at the end of the thread when you're
Mhm.
trying to darn socks or something,
Yeah.
that has helped hold everything together since then. When I was less than 2 years old, I had my first bout of serious pneumonia, and it was compounded by doctors finding out the hard way that I'm allergic to penicillin and sulfa drugs. So I went into anaphylactic shock, was in the hospital, was given last rites and extreme at the time, and was not expected to live. But I did, blessedly. And from that point, I had pneumonia about 12 more times before I was 18 years old.
Oh, wow.
And because of my allergy to penicillin and sulfa drugs, I would be isolated from school and recovering sometimes 3, 4 weeks at a time. So my childhood, in great part, was an isolated period of time. But my mother was really good about keeping me current on my schoolwork. Being sick was not an excuse for
No.
not getting that work done. And also, she was a catechist. So
Mhm.
she taught Catholic religious education. And she taught me about the faith as I was suffering from illness, which is so important to what I'm doing now.
Mhm. Mhm.
She gave me her adult Bible to read at a very young age, and she said, "You can read anything in this beautiful book. If you have any questions, be sure to ask me. I'm happy to try to answer any questions you have, but I want you to be able to read the book directly." And then she also gave me the gift of prayer. So she taught me the prayers that we memorize early on
Mhm.
and what they meant. But she also said, no matter how sick you are, no matter how isolated you are, you can always talk to God. So I had scripture, and I started with Genesis and started reading through the whole Bible, Old Testament, New Testament. And then when I finished it, I went back to the beginning again. And in reading it, I was correlating what I was reading about God with this conversation with God that my mom had encouraged me to have. So that the God that I was talking to was also this God from the Bible. And that was such a powerful combination, a powerful relationship to see, and that I was part of what I now know is, salvation history,
Mhm.
was just awesome.
Yeah.
And my prayer life deepened, my understanding of faith deepened in ways that probably would not have happened if I had been learning about everything in the classroom and was tested on it and, all that fun stuff.
Yes.
Um, so so there were these long stretches of being sick. There were also periods where I would be very active. And when I was well, I tried to cram everything I possibly could into 48 hours in the 24 hours of a day. I loved the arts. I did theater, music, writing. I was precociously writing my first screenplays and roping my cousins into being my audience, for the debuts. It was a time of immense productivity and immense not idleness in a negative sense, but um, I'm from central Illinois, and when a farmer lets the field lie fallow, it means they're not planting anything in it of a
Mhm.
particular season. But the land itself, there's a lot going on underneath the surface. So being bedridden with pneumonia and recovering from it was not a period necessarily of nothing happening within me. Actually, a lot was,
Mhm.
but it was a very unusual childhood, and I learned early on a couple of important things from that experience. One being that it's okay to introduce children to sickness and to the vulnerability of our bodies.
Mhm.
In fact, it's really important because if we don't understand at an early age how wonderful our bodies are, but also how vulnerable, then we're not going to be as inclined to take care of them and might be more inclined to take risks with them than not.
Mhm.
So that is really important. And also to not be afraid of being sick and to know that God is always with you. I take God with me into the MRI tube, into the doctor's waiting room. I talk to my doctors now about my faith, even if they don't share my faith. They're very aware of who I am and how important my spiritual life is. And they respect that also. So
Important,
many
yeah.
good things came out of those times when I was extremely sick.
So it sounds like with your comparison to the farming that oh, and I just lost exactly what I was going to say, but with the farming and when you let the you said it's called fallow, right?
The land lies fallow.
Lies
Yes.
fallow. It's
Mhm.
it's it's regenerating, right? It's kind of
Yes.
like the idea of I understand crop rotation. So that's where you plant something different so that the nutrients can replenish. So
Mhm.
I imagine if it's fallowing, it's even regenerating even more because there's not something different that's taking different nutrients out.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes.
And so with that, while you are lying isolated, dare I say dormant, to the outside world, you can be regenerating and your nutrients may not necessarily be like the iron and the whatever the copper zinc type things, but you're generating the
Mhm.
nutrients of your faith and your prayer life and the ingredients of the Bible and the prayers that your mother gave you.
Absolutely.
And
And also, as we get older, if we are diagnosed, as I was with lupus in my 30s, then not only is that fallow period important and can be rejuvenating, but we have control over what we bring into it. So if we sit around and every ache and pain is magnified and we're focused on that, then that's what we're bringing into our souls, our minds, our hearts. But if we're mindful of how our bodies are feeling and we're paying attention and doing all the good things that we need to do to take care of them, and we bring into those times when we can't go out with our friends, we can't go to work, we can't do a lot of things. If we put things into our lives, our hearts, what we listen to, what we watch, that is good, that is nurturing, then that's the kind of nutritional value we're going to have coming into ourselves that will strengthen us for those times when we can just um, run like a dog when someone left the gate open
And they
and
do
just
try to do
burst
that.
out
Yes,
into the
yes.
world.
Well, that goes hand in hand with you saying trying to squeeze 48 hours into a 24-hour
Yes.
period with all of your creative and arts ideas. And so that kind of leads into, if I'm not mistaken, into the next period of your life in your schooling, you actually went to school for the arts.
Yes, I did. I wanted to do it in my undergrad years, and for various reasons, I did not. I went to Georgetown University and did a more rigorous academic program, but still did French theater. French was my major, and I acted in French plays, and
Oh,
I,
wow.
I sang with campus ministry groups and made the most as much as I could of the artistic experience on campus. But I always wanted to get a degree in theater. And so I started one. However, I got very sick and ended up being diagnosed with hyperthyroidism, Graves' disease, and had to abandon my plans for a bit while I recovered from that. And then reapplied to graduate schools for theater and was accepted at UCLA's School of Theater, Film, and Television. So I moved from the East Coast out to Hollywood, and thought that I would be writing screenplays and stage plays, musicals, that would be the career that I would be pursuing. And at the
Mhm.
time, it was a pretty clear sign that that was a viable path to have discerned because being accepted to UCLA was no small feat.
Right.
And getting through the program was also no small feat. So when I graduated, I put my heart and soul into it. I was also conducting a Black gospel choir at a Catholic church in South Central Los Angeles, and loved that and the spirituality that flowed with every single liturgy, and every song was just remarkable. I was there for 13 years. And in that period of time, while I was working and shopping scripts in Hollywood, I had some plays produced, all of that going on. I started feeling very, very sick. I didn't know what was wrong, but my hair was falling out. I got weird rashes on my face. I was spiking fevers. I was so tired that I would oversleep my alarm, and no matter how much sleep I got, it was not restorative at all. So my hands were giving out. I was dropping things after picking them up. And doctors were at first quite perplexed about what could be going on. And I learned later, as many people with chronic illness learn, that we don't look sick. So a doctor would look at me and say, "Oh, you're just stressed because you look
Mhm.
fine." And I
Right.
wasn't fine. I was far
Yes.
from fine. And by the time I was diagnosed with lupus, organ involved, so my internal organs were being involved, being attacked by lupus. One of the rheumatologists I saw said, "Lupus is trying to kill you. And if you don't stop and take care of yourself now, it will." And that was like a cold bucket of water poured over
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, you had said earlier that when you were isolated at home, you were learning about how if you didn't take care of your body, or if you didn't learn about it, then you would be less likely to take care of it.
mhm.
And I mean, I don't know what your experience in Hollywood was, but I was involved in a couple of small films, and it's hard to take care of your body and your sleep schedule
Mhm.
and everything when you're working on a film.
Oh, it's impossible. And you're fully committed to the
Hmm.
production. And that's when I realized that, and I learned that lupus, there's no cure for lupus. It's an ongoing chronic illness. It can flare and subside. It can also be fatal, and it can have different symptoms at different points in its trajectory. Everybody's different who has lupus with different symptoms and degrees of severity, et cetera. So as I learned about the disease, I knew that I couldn't do what I thought I was supposed to be doing with my writing and survive. I really had to come to a fork in the road and take the road best traveled. So, so I turned to God, and a lot of doctors started medications, and those had horrible side effects. It was a very tumultuous time. Um, but through it all, I turned to God and I said, you've given me these gifts, you've given me this experience at UCLA, this opportunity, but what in the world do you want me to do now, given my condition? And um, I, so when I was diagnosed with lupus, I looked around at the books that were available, and a lot of them were written by physicians or psychologists. And many were good, very good. My own doctor had written a couple of them, but there was no book written by a patient who had lupus about how to live the day to day with this disease. So, for example, lupus, many people are so sun sensitive or sensitive to UV rays, like to fluorescent lighting, that we can't expose ourselves to it because we could get into worse flares or
Okay.
have a new organ flare problem. So, how do you live with that in Southern California or really anywhere?
Right. Yeah.
Um, if you're living in a very hot, humid place during the summer and you have to wear long sleeve shirts, long sleeve pants, hats, it's how do you live with it?
Right.
How
Yeah.
do you talk to people about your need to get sleep, your need to avoid infections because you're taking immunosuppressive drugs or how all of these things?
Mhm.
How do you talk to people so that you can help them understand and so that there might be a higher likelihood that they won't back away from a friendship or a relationship? All of these
Yeah.
questions that are really hard for people who are not living the experience to genuinely write to, authentically write to. So I contacted my literary agent and I told her about my diagnosis. And I said, I have this idea for a book. And she said that she had been looking for a book on lupus because her sister in law had passed away from lupus. And she wanted to champion a book in her honor. My agent was a fantastically faith filled, wonderful Catholic woman. And so I put together a proposal, and a tremendous rheumatologist agreed to co-author the book with me. So I wrote the patient part of things, he wrote the physician part of things. And that book was published by New American Library, by Penguin. It's called Taking Charge of Lupus: How to Manage the Disease and Make the Most of Your Life. And that set me on more of this journey that I'm now on.
So
I
God gave you
I
the answer to what am I
just was
supposed to
opening
do?
doors. Um,
Oh.
all the while I'm going bald and, taking these high dose prednisone and all these other,
Mhm.
God still God works at any time in any circumstance.
Yes, he does.
Which you found out also with, with what this podcast is about.
Exactly.
All of
And
the
and
subject matter.
and yes, and the impetus, with my own cancer journey and with my son's autism, um, because you mentioned, like, you don't look sick. Well, my son doesn't look sick. He's got a chronic condition called autism, and he has the different, just like you mentioned, the different variety of symptoms. Not everybody has the same symptoms or
Right?
the same severity. And, you would look at him and you wouldn't know. Now, sometimes if you talk to him, you'll get the picture, but just to look at somebody. And I think that's something that's so important in our society today, that we have to stop looking at people and literally judging the book by the cover.
Yes,
And say, well, you don't look sick, so how can you possibly be sick?
right.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I've had people tell me I have no business parking in a handicapped parking spot because those are only for people in wheelchairs. And I it's hard, but I try to do some education. Like, you can't see someone who's just had a heart attack. You can't see someone who is in the early stages of Parkinson's. You can't see someone who has lupus.
Right.
But trust that there's a good reason to, they need to conserve energy, or they need to park in the shade or something.
Mhm. Yeah.
So, yeah, you're right. There is a real need for compassion, um,
Mhm. Yeah.
and listening,
Yes. Which,
listening.
which that could go into several different podcast episodes. There's
It
a
certainly
lot of
could.
areas we need to start listening.
But and we're fast forwarding quite a bit, but
Sure.
so during that period that I was writing, taking charge of lupus, I was also journaling my experience in faith and scripture with this chronic illness. And I started the journal because with all the medication I was taking, I was forgetting what I prayed about day to day, that it
Okay.
was just overwhelming. And about a year after starting that journal, I looked at it and I took it to my agent and I said, I think there's something here that other people could benefit from. And she
Mhm.
read that excerpt, which was the beginning of Peace in the Storm, and said, I think you're right. So put together a proposal for that. There's nothing like it at the time at all. And still really isn't. There isn't anything like it. Um, it's a devotional with a scripture verse, a reflection, and a prayer for specific aspects of living with chronic illness and chronic pain, the day to day, a really wide range of subjects. So if you're afraid of passing your illness along to your children, or you're on the eve of surgery, you're wondering, why me? One of my favorites is when the you knew seems to disappear. I
Yeah.
looked in the mirror one morning after losing my hair over the course of about a year, and that one morning stands out in my mind because I looked at myself and I saw this bald person, and I thought, I don't recognize myself. I have no hair at all. And I had thick, wavy, naturally blonde hair before everything fell out.
Mhm.
So, so there are things like that the book encourages people to just take it all to God, you know, not just worship on Sunday or the Bible study on Thursdays, but take it all to God. If you get angry, take it to God. If you insurance snafus, take it to God.
Yes.
um,
Yes.
Angry with the customer service person at the other end of the phone, take that to God too. Ask for
Mhm.
forgiveness. Uh, we're not, just because we live with serious illness doesn't mean we're exempt from needing
Yes.
God's mercy and forgiveness too for things that we do, the oopses that we
Which,
suffer.
yes, which we all have. We all
Yes, we all
have.
have those.
And I like that point that you just made, though, that, and I think a lot of it, when we do say that, why me, we are we're looking inward, and I think it's a natural question to ask, but it also, I think, it's also a natural progression to be thinking that maybe you are exempt from this or that. And, yes, well, I'm allowed to get a little angry because I have X, or it, and I think that's
Right.
a
And
human.
aren't I suffering enough?
Yes.
And I've heard a couple of people, we're recording this in Lent.
Yes.
A couple of people I've heard say, um, but I do Lent 365 days a year.
Mhm.
Why do I need to do extra during these 40 days? Um, we can all improve. We can all, we all stumble and we fall and um, hopefully we don't break a hip, but we
Yes.
we do still need, we're still on a journey. So that's another part of it. We're not journeying with illness, hanging out somewhere else spiritually and waiting for the illness to go away so we can continue on our path with God.
Mm, good
They're
point.
together.
Yes, they are together. Mhm.
This is your life. This is my life right now. Now God could cure at any moment.
Yes.
We know that. And miraculous cures do happen, but we can't force God's hand and say, okay, I'm going to pray at 5 a.m. every morning for the next 30 days, and then God, you'll cure me.
I think I had that attitude when I did my first novena.
Oh, yeah. It's
Well,
like,
I
good luck
prayed
with
for
that.
this thing for 9 days. Why didn't it happen?
And it's not bad to pray those novenas.
Right.
That regular prayer is important, and God answers in God's own time.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
your prayer
And
may
in
not
his,
have been answered in the way you think it should have been answered, but you never know.
but you never
And
know.
oh, did I find that out with what the journal that I was writing that became
Mm.
the book Peace in the Storm? Amazing. Because so Doubleday Religion published Peace in the Storm, Meditations on Chronic Pain and Illness in 2005. This year is the 20th
Yeah.
anniversary of the book being in continuous print. And
Amazing.
I was thrilled. And it was always in my heart that the book would be used in Catholic churches with small faith fellowship sharing groups to support people who were living with chronic health conditions to be stronger in faith and then become more participatory in their faith in the life of the church. That was 2005, and I waited. There were other churches, not Catholic, that used the book in that way.
Mhm.
Um, and I would ask at every chance that I got, wouldn't this be great? Wouldn't you be interested in a group? Blah, blah, blah. And nothing took. So in 2021, during the pandemic, I used the time of sequestering to get a master's in theology at the Jesuit School of Theology. And I
So you
focused
didn't
on
just bake sourdough bread, you went and got a degree.
that. I thought
Wow.
this is the perfect time. I do home really well, so this is the time. So I
Yeah.
did, and it was fantastic. But at the same time, my mother, her health in Illinois was going downhill, and she was much older, obviously, and I realized that she needed more support. So on the evening of graduating from JST, we had graduation online. She went into the ER in Illinois. Um, and that was kind of the beginning of the really precipitous decline. So, although I graduated and had intended to, with my newly minted, master in theological studies, to really pursue having a ministry with Peace in the Storm, I couldn't and became a long distance caregiver to my mother and eventually her legal guardian. And that was an all consuming activity. I, it was one of the hardest things I've ever done. And my health did suffer for it because there were many wake up calls in the wee hours and all kinds of other things and travel back and forth. It was very grueling. I had been a caregiver in different ways to my brother who passed away at 35 and my father, but this experience with my mother was really intense for a while. And so starting a ministry just wasn't, I couldn't do it.
Right.
But at that point where my mother was going into the ER for the first time, and I graduated from JST, there was a woman I didn't know in a parish I didn't know, in a state I didn't have connections with, who had been diagnosed with cancer and was looking for a book to support her Catholic faith. And she found Peace in the Storm, brought it to her parochial vicar, who said, "You should start a group because there are more people who could benefit from this book." So she started the first faith fellowship group using Peace in the Storm in this small group, um, completely unbeknownst to me. And I didn't find out about it until toward the end of my mother's life in 2022.
Oh,
And she sent me an email, um, introducing herself and asking for 20 copies of another book of mine that had gone out of print. And I emailed her back and I said, "Well, I do have stock, but why do you need 20 copies of one book?" I'm grateful, but.
yeah.
And she told me about the group and I started crying. I was just so filled with gratitude. This was exactly the ministry that had been on my heart since 2005. And although at the time that I found out about it, I still couldn't really do anything about it because mom was heading into hospice at that point. I met with Pat, the woman, and Father David, the parochial vicar, who both said they felt the ministry should be in every parish in the country and that I needed discussion guides. And I agreed with that completely. And they felt the book could benefit from the imprimatur, which I had asked for back in 2005, but the publisher wouldn't pursue it. So this time around, I said, well, let's go for it. And my mother passed away between Christmas and New Year's of 2022. And shortly after that, I started developing the first discussion guide for the book. And it went into the process for the imprimatur with Bishop Caggiano in the Diocese of Bridgeport, Connecticut. Another Holy Spirit thing, because the first group started in the Diocese of Bridgeport, and there was understanding about the group and the book and what it could do from the get-go.
Mhm.
The imprimatur came through in 2023, and from that point, I started knocking on doors with people I'd been working with in national disability ministry work, and doing the webinars and the retreats that I had been doing prior to the pandemic and a little bit during. Um, and from there, the ministry has just grown and grown. And we now also have Peace in the Storm for caregivers. So groups of caregivers can meet. And you're a caregiver, you know and you've had cancer. So you know the different
Mhm.
kinds of experiences that those are.
Right.
Um,
And that was, when I did go through my cancer, which was during the pandemic, I was in a chemo chair when the lockdowns
yeah.
came down. And I had to learn to, I guess, release my pride and allow someone else to be a caregiver. And I had some really good ones. So that was a very beautiful lesson to learn. And
And
yeah.
that's part of the warrior mindset, to
Mhm.
know when you need that support and to be open to it.
It was tough. I think that's a lesson I have to keep coming back to. That's one I have to keep learning. I'm not there yet. Because I'm
Oh,
so
you the
used,
hair.
well, I'm so used to being the
Yeah,
caregiver that it's hard when to accept sometimes when someone comes along and says, "Well, let me do that. You don't have
sure.
to do that." And so, but I think it is something that we all need to learn, and we could probably all benefit from both of those books because I think in our lifetimes we're going to be at least one, if not both, of those
True,
perspectives.
true, true.
So, and you don't just have to have lupus to be to benefit from peace in the storm because it's chronic illness in general,
Oh,
right?
yeah. And people in the groups, now we have groups in about 15 dioceses throughout the country and growing.
Wow. Wow.
And people have everything from cancer to mental health issues to um, the autoimmune, there's a whole constellation of autoimmune illnesses, including
Mhm.
lupus, but there are many, many more.
Right.
Parkinson's and just all kinds of different illnesses, but there's a common ground that we all have in the effects on us physically, emotionally, spiritually of these ongoing illnesses. And who better to understand but those of us living it? Um,
Exactly.
it's something that people who haven't gotten there, we don't wish it on anybody, but
Right. Yeah.
sometimes it's easier for us to be talking with people who understand you can feel fine 1 minute and then the next minute just have to cancel all your plans for the weekend
Mm.
because you're in a flare or you've suddenly gotten sick or something happens. And so bringing people together in these groups, I mean, the books were meant to be individual devotionals,
Mhm.
but bringing people together in the groups reinforces the understanding that no one is alone. And all over the world, there are people praying for us who are sharing like experiences. And then the caregiving, we have, and when I was doing it, there were plenty of legal resources, social service resources, medical resources, all these other aspects of the process of caregiving for somebody that were available. But the spiritual support and the accompaniment was the piece that seemed most shaky. Even finding someone to come by apart from the regular monthly schedule to give Eucharist
Mhm. Yeah.
or to just drop in and visit if I couldn't be there was a challenge. So from from that, I realized how important it was to have Peace in the Storm for Caregivers that frames the experience of caregiving. It really is a calling. It
Yeah.
really is something that, again, we're not doing the caregiving and putting everything else on hold, including our relationship with God, until the caregiving's over.
Right. Right. Yeah.
It is
They're
all
not.
together.
Yes, they are not separate. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it can be easy to defer some of the spiritual things because some of the other things get to be so pressing. You have to make the medical decisions. You have to do
Right.
this. You have to do that. But if we bring that spirituality along, those deep breaths, the prayer of just, Lord, give me the right words to say or the right insight to make the right decision, then the peace that we feel underneath it all can be remarkable.
And I love the title of the book, the peace in the storm, not after the storm,
Right.
in it, peace in the storm. So if somebody, and I don't know if this is possible because I did not ask you this ahead of time, but if somebody wanted to bring either a peace in the storm small group or a caregiver um, small group to their parish or to their diocese, could they contact you? Would there be a way
Absolutely.
that they could do that?
Absolutely. So all they would need to do is they could first of all go to the website, thepeaceandthestormproject.com. We have a sample, an excerpt from the discussion guide on the website, so somebody could go into the website, explore it, find out about my fellow board members, Sally Pastoric and Deacon Michael Bellender, both of whom have lived with chronic illness, chronic pain. Deacon Michael is also a chaplain in hospice and in the hospital, so he's got that experience too. But learn about them and the ministry and where we have groups already. There's a link to directly to some of the parishes' websites with information on their groups. And then if you want to start a group, just reach out to me or Sally Pastoric, and we're reachable through the website. My email is Maureen at thepeaceandthestormproject.com. And Sally's is Sally, Sally, at thepeaceandthestormproject.com. And we will get in touch with you. We have a starter kit that helps explain everything. Setting up the groups is super, super easy, and there's no cost to getting the discussion guides and the bulletin blurbs that we have, the flyer, the templates, and all
Mhm.
of that. You work with your pastor to get the room, the time, start the announcements going in your parish. And we have a discussion guide that's 7 sessions that covers 7 particular themes from each of the books and one of the 7 sacraments of the church. So, how does that figure into our spirituality? And then we have special discussion guides for the special seasons: Lent, Easter, the Easter season, and Advent, Christmas, and the Christmas season. So the only cost to parishes right now is really just the books, and parishes that want to start groups will be able to get a discount guide for a discount link for the books too.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Thanks for
Now,
asking.
yeah, well, and I was also thinking while you were saying, because you had mentioned earlier that small groups had started up in other churches. So because I know I have other Christian denomination listeners.
Mhm.
So would they be able to do this as well? It's not specific to Catholic parishes and Catholic dioceses.
Well,
And
so both books and the materials that go with the books are theologically and spiritually sound Catholic books and discussion guides. Um, Peace in the Storm for Caregivers also was granted the imprimatur. So, in terms of what kind of Christianity it is, it's Catholic, definitely.
Mhm.
And so, to the extent that other churches are comfortable with that, yes, absolutely. Um, in the groups that started when Peace in the Storm first came out, it was interesting because in some cases, they were not aware that I was a Catholic, although my website says it and all of that.
Mhm.
And it really did see a readership that went beyond the Catholic Church. In some ways, um, it was adopted there before my people in my own Catholic faith adopted the book. Some of that was because, and I was told this early on, the Catholics don't read the Bible. So having Bible verses was like, oh, how can you do that? Like, well, it's kind of like the foundation of our faith.
Yeah, just a little bit.
We hear Bible readings every Mass.
Yeah.
Do read the Bible. Um, and and so absolutely, yes. It even there are people who find the books who don't profess a belief in Christ and find help in the books, which I think is beautiful. Um, but they firmly stand on Catholic theology and teaching.
Okay. Well, I think that I think that it's available, and so that people can still explore and get valuable benefits just from either a caregiver perspective or someone living with chronic illness. So I want to thank you for that, and I'm gonna make sure that we get the email addresses that you said and the website into the show notes so that people can come and either click directly or copy those email addresses. But I want to give you an opportunity to. I like to ask people if you have any warrior words that if you could just like you're just looking into the camera and there is someone out there with chronic illness, or there's someone out there who is caregiving for a loved one with chronic illness, what would you want to say directly to them?
Know that you are loved and that you have a unique purpose, that God is working within you to realize. That purpose might be the most beautiful gift of prayer for others. It might be starting a ministry. It might be anything, but you are loved and you do have a purpose. And keep on being a warrior, not in a stressful way with the challenges that you're facing in life, but a warrior in terms of consistency of forward motion. So if all you can do today is listen to this podcast, that's absolutely fine. And if tomorrow you can lift up a prayer for others throughout the world who are suffering, that's fantastic. And that is a valid, wonderful, beautiful purpose. So the more you move forward in whatever way you can, the stronger you become. And the clearer you become on what unique gifts you have to give and how God wants you to bring those gifts to others. Sometimes all I can do of a day is try to be kind to my doctors and share a joke with the phlebotomist who's drawing my blood. And that's okay.
And that's okay.
And that's important. So, not alone, keep moving forward. Take very good care of this earthen vessel that you are living in, this body, this health, this life. And God bless you.
And perfect ending. So thank you, Maureen. I appreciate you sharing your journey with us and your storms and the peace that you found in them.
Thank you so much, Heather. And God bless you for your ministry, for this
Oh,
wonderful podcast.
oh well,
Keep on moving forward with it too.
yes, yes, we will. We will. All right.
Amen.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Best laid plans. I think this is something we all do as humans. We make plans for all kinds of things, including what we're going to do as our life's work. As Maureen shared, she had plans to go to Hollywood and become a scriptwriter, write screenplays. She even shared that her discernment indicated that it might have been a good idea. Maureen even had what some would consider success in Tinseltown. But the plans she had made had to change. Being diagnosed with a life-threatening chronic illness required that Maureen have some life-changing alterations to her lifestyle and her plans. Now, that doesn't mean her original discernment was wrong. She got valuable experience during her time in Hollywood. She met people, she got her work published and produced, and she got to lead a gospel choir. Instead of asking why me, and I think that's a question a lot of us ask. I know I have. But instead of asking why me, she used what she learned in her early years about faith, prayer, and the God who loved her. So she changed the question and asked him, "What do you want me to do with this?" And God led her on a journey of discovery. Thinking she was searching for a book for her own needs, led her on a path to creating something her literary agent had been seeking. Isn't it so like our God to answer Maureen's question that way? Though, as we know, sometimes we don't get quick answers. It took her 17 years to get the answer to the prayer for the Peace in the Storm book to be used as a small group study in a church, in a state she wasn't familiar with, and in a church she'd never attended. Maureen shared with us 2 instances of how God answered prayer, and only one of them looks the way that we tend to expect God to answer our prayers. But we need to remember, God is not a vending machine where we can input our prayer and get the output we desire immediately. And then sometimes we don't even get the answer we want. Sometimes we don't realize or think about the fact that we see things only through our lens at a specific moment or a specific place in time. On the other hand, God sees how our part in the world intersects with all of the other humans with their needs and wants. So our lives are only like part of the bigger picture, kind of maybe like one piece in this giant puzzle. Maureen's surrender, acceptance, and obedience allowed her to be open to God's will and God's timing. And through it, she found peace in the storms of her life. God blessed her with a gift to use her words, and she got to use them. She still gets to use them through screenplays, in her books, in her speaking. She may have had to change her plans, but her early exposure to faith and prayer and acceptance of life's storms provided the ability to carry that with her. There was a purpose to her suffering. She was able to learn to find peace in her storms and then use her gift of words to help you find peace in yours. Where can you find peace in your current storm? Or how can you care for someone else in their storm? Something to think about this week. So until we meet again, armor up, fight the good fight, seek beauty, and make your words warrior words. God bless.